Hello, everyone. I hope you will support the discussion in the comments and tell me what you would do if you found yourself in the situations I am going to talk about today. I didn't go looking for a fight with neighbors. I moved into the subdivision because I liked quiet mornings, the way dawn smells like wet wood, and the small lake at the center that glinted behind the sycamores. On my third week there, before I even knew who was on the board of the Homeowners Association, I carried a lightweight, 12-foot kayak down to the water at sunrise, slid off the riprap by the spillway, and paddled out. I kept to the middle, rolling easy strokes, thinking about which window still needed caulk, how my sister's twins would love to watch turtles from the bow when school let out, and whether the old carp finning just below the surface would tolerate a camera. The water was glass. A heron stood on one leg near the cattails, like it owned the place. When I came back in, there was a paper tucked under my wiper blade. Notice of violation, it said, in a template font that wanted me to feel small. Unauthorized boating on lake. The letter said the Homeowners Association, everyone called it the HOA, though I hadn't even found the clubhouse yet, had voted 6 months prior to restrict boating. It cited a rule number I later learned didn't exist when the Declaration of Covenants was recorded. The fine was $250, payable within 10 days, doubling every 30 days if unpaid. The letter was unsigned, but someone had stamped a digital scan of a signature of Chair Compliance Committee in blue ink that looked like a real pen until you tipped the page. I called the number at the bottom. "I'm just trying to understand," I said. "Is the lake off limits?" A woman introduced herself as Denise. She said she was the management company's point of contact. "Boating requires a permit," she said. "Permits are not being issued at this time due to wildlife restoration." "I was in a kayak," I said. "No motor. I stayed well away from the shore." "We have to apply rules consistently," she said. "I'm sure you understand." I said I did, though I didn't understand at all because I'd watched a kid in an aluminum skiff run a trolling motor the evening before, while his father, 2 houses down, cheered from the gazebo. I took a breath. "Can I appeal?" "You may request a hearing," she said in a tone that made clear the hearing was for show. "But the fine is due." 2 days later, a second letter arrived by certified mail. It warned that unpaid assessments and fines could result in a lien against my property and, if left unresolved, foreclosure. I read that line twice, placed the letter on the counter, and looked out at the lake the way you look at a neighbor who's been polite up until a certain point and then tells you what you can and can't do on your own Saturday. I went to the next board meeting. It was in the evening, folding chairs spaced tight, fluorescent tubes humming. The board sat behind a long table with a bowl of individually wrapped peppermints, as if sugar would smooth over everything. The president was a man named Craig, a former contractor with a jaw like a cinder block. There was also a treasurer named Rita, who clicked a pen through the entire meeting, and a secretary named Alana, who never once made eye contact with anyone in the audience. The compliance committee chair was a man named Victor, clean haircut, in a habit of smoothing his tie, even though we were in a room with a carpet stain the size of a pizza. After announcements about mulch deliveries and fence-stained colors, I raised my hand. "I'm here about the fine," I said. "I took a kayak out. It's silent. I wore a life vest. I slipped in from the common path. I wasn't anywhere near the homeowner's docks. I'd written this down so my voice wouldn't shake. I don't see a restriction in the covenants. I only see a rule that permits may be required for any floating apparatus if the lake owner requires it." I let that sit for a beat. "Who owns the lake?" "Lake is common property," said Craig, quick. I'd already pulled the plat from the county's online portal, and I knew that wasn't true. "The plat shows Lot A as the lake, deeded to the developer's holding company," I said. "The common area is a strip of land around it with a walking path. The covenants say surface use is subject to the owner's consent." Victor folded his hands. "The developer assigned rights to the association," he said, confident. "If that's so," I said, "I'd like to see the assignment document." The room got quiet in a way that had nothing to do with being neighborly. After the meeting, in the hallway where they'd posted holiday party photos from before I moved in, a woman named Margot pulled me aside. "They picked the wrong one to tangle with," she said, sotto voce. "You're not the first." She told me that last summer, a boy had been told to get off the water even though he wore a life vest, and the lake had been the deciding factor in his parents' choice to buy a house there. The board had formed the compliance committee after an incident with a rented pontoon during a graduation party. Music, cans left in the grass. They'd swung hard in the other direction to avoid liability. But, Margot said, the committee never enforced the rule against their friends. She'd seen Victor's nephew run a stand-up paddleboard across the lake, while two girls took pictures at noon on a Saturday, and nobody said a word. I requested the hearing anyway. I brought printed copies of the recorded covenants and the plat map. Denise was there, along with Victor and two members I didn't know. I asked again for the assignment document. Victor said the board relied on attorney advice and that the document was in the association records, but they did not have to share it with me because of attorney-client privilege. Then they voted to uphold the fine and to begin daily penalties. $25 per day. For each day I failed to remove the kayak apparatus. They meant the cheap plastic wall hooks in my garage. I asked if they'd like to inspect my garage to confirm the hooks were not on the exterior of the home. Victor said the fine schedule allowed penalties for related violations. I asked where that phrase appeared. He didn't answer. I paid the initial $250 to stop the escalation, but put a note on the memo line. Paid under protest. I then did something that wasn't about anger, but about wanting the ground to stop shifting under my shoes. I went down to the county administration building, the kind where the HVAC kicks on and rattles and the security guard is friendly because nobody is angry down there unless a permit got lost. It took most of an afternoon to trace the chain of title on Lot A. The lake had been carved out of the main parcel when the subdivision was built. The developer had deeded it to a company with a name like a shrug, the kind of placeholder people create to hold assets they don't want to forget about, but also don't want to think about. The company's address on file was a P.O. box that had closed. Taxes had been paid the first few years, and then not at all. Is it eligible for the delinquent property sale? I asked the clerk. She squinted at the screen, chewed her lip, and nodded. Looks like it falls into the next round, she said. But you'll want to check whether there are any recorded easements or covenants that run with the land. I've looked at the covenants, I said. They say surface use is subject to owner consent. She looked impressed in the way clerks get when someone's done their homework. You should also check the dam inspection reports if there are any, she said. Haven't seen this one in a while. Sometimes water bodies are just holes. Sometimes they're liabilities with water in them. I hired a surveyor named Ben, who showed up in dusty boots and a hat that had traveled across several states already. He drove stakes along the embankment and muttered into a handheld. He told me the lake was a man-made basin fed by a creek that wasn't navigable under the state's tests, which meant the water was not subject to the public trust the way a big river might have been. It's private, he said, like a big shiny puddle with rules. He pointed to the low earthen dam at the south end. That's the piece to worry about. You'll want an engineer to check the spillway and the outlet pipe. I called an engineer, a patient woman named Stella, who wore a neon vest with reflective strips and carried a clipboard like a shield. She said the dam was considered small and low hazard. The emergency action plan was outdated but doable. The outlet pipe was rusted but functional. Plan on relining it within 5 years, she said. Don't keep trees growing on the embankment. Roots can form conduits. I wrote that down. We walked the bank, counting muskrat holes. She told me how to trap them humanely or hire someone who would. I never imagined I'd learn it, but there I was. I also did something that made my stomach flutter. I talked to a real estate attorney, a man named Owen, who had the rare skill of making things sound less complicated after he explained them. He reviewed the covenants and the plat and frowned at a clause that had confused me. The one about surface use being subject to owner consent, and that the owner may issue or withhold permits at its sole discretion. Owen said it was unusual, but not unheard of. The developer kept control of the lake, he said, probably to maintain leverage or because they intended to sell it later. The association got maintenance obligations for the shoreline path and stormwater inlets, but not the lake itself. Could the association argue implied rights? I asked. They can argue anything, he said, but the recorded documents say what they say. If the lake is auctioned for tax delinquency and you purchase it free of liens, you'll step into the shoes of the developer's holding company. And then I can issue or withhold permits. He folded his hands. Legally, yes. Practically, you'll make enemies, but you've made enemies already. I didn't sleep well that week, not because I was afraid of enemies, but because the idea of controlling a body of water made me feel like I was wearing a shirt I only half liked. At the same time, the fine had felt like somebody had cut a weird corner out of my life and told me it was irregular. I decided that if I played this, I'd play it openly and document everything. At the county sale, the lake came up after a series of empty lots and a strip of land behind a fast food place where the dumpsters sat. The auctioneer's tie had chili stains. A few investors murmured about whether the lake could be filled and developed. The county attorney cleared her throat and read a note. The basin could not be filled because of stormwater obligations tied to the subdivision's final plat. It had to remain a water feature unless a new plan was approved. The bidding started at the amount of the unpaid taxes plus fees. I lifted my hand. A man in a trucker cap bid once, and then, seeing I was going to raise him, lifted his hands like he was letting me drive into a parking space first. I won for an amount that made my palms sweat, but was less than many people pay for a car. I hired a title company to handle what they could. They found no liens. I paid a premium for owner's title insurance because my mother's voice lives in my head and says things like, "Be careful now." We recorded the deed. The lake parcel became mine. I did not do anything flashy. I didn't paddle out with a flag. I didn't post on the neighborhood forum that I now owned the thing everyone saw when they opened their blinds. I wrote a letter to the association addressed to the board and copied Denise and the registered agent. I explained that I had acquired Lot A at a duly advertised tax sale, that the covenants gave the lake owner discretion to issue or withhold permits for surface use, that I would be maintaining the dam under state guidelines, and that I would be instituting a permit system for any floating craft. I included a list of safety requirements like U.S. Coast Guard approved life vests, as well as limits on hours to respect nesting birds at dawn and dusk. I said I would begin accepting permit applications on a stated date. Then, very carefully, I wrote a sentence that I knew would turn the room cold when they read it. As of the date of this letter, I am the only person with a valid permit to boat on the lake. I added new facts that mattered to me, not because I wanted to push anyone's face into them, but because the board had turned a simple thing into a contest, and I wanted the record to show why. In my letter, I described the kayak in detail, a sit-on-top model with a red milk crate strapped behind the seat, equipped with a whistle, a throw rope, and a waterproof case for my phone. I noted that I had taken a basic boater safety course offered by the state, even though it wasn't required for non-motorized craft. I included the engineer's memo about the dam and the plan to inspect after heavy rains. I attached a photo of the cracked concrete lip of the spillway and said I would repair it at my expense within 6 months. I told them I'd contacted a local biologist about a volunteer shoreline planting day to replace invasive grasses with native rushes. I did these things because they were right, and also because they made it impossible for anyone to say I had been reckless. The response from the board was fire and ice. They sent back a letter stating the association disapproved of any unilateral action and would be consulting counsel to challenge my purchase. They argued that the lake was intended as a common amenity and that the association had equitable servitudes that allowed residents access regardless of the recorded language. I called Owen again. He said, "They'll threaten. They'll probably file something so they can say they're protecting homeowners' rights. But your position is solid." The board scheduled an emergency meeting. People filled the room and spilled into the hallway, whispering. Craig pounded the gavel as if volume equaled authority. He introduced the association's attorney, a man with a practiced smile who said a lot in a little while. He trotted out phrases like spirit of the community and reasonable expectations. He said my permit policy was an affront to neighborliness. He did not, however, point to a recorded right. I waited my turn and then stood with my notes. When I first moved here, I said, I took a kayak out at dawn, quietly, wearing a life vest. I received a $250 fine and a threat of a lien and foreclosure if I didn't comply with a rule that doesn't exist in the documents. The management company refused to provide the supposed assignment document. Rather than escalate, I paid the fine under protest, did the research, and acquired the lake legally. I'm taking responsibility for dam safety and invasive species control. I'm willing to discuss guest permits after we stabilize the shoreline and establish a training session for safe use, but I will not accept a system where enforcement depends on who someone is friends with. In the hallway, voices rose. A man named Todd, who once complained about the color of my mailbox, accused me of ruining his children's summer. A woman named Lila said the board had treated her the same way, telling her to move a bird feeder because it attracted squirrels, while ignoring the president's own feeder. Margot squeezed my arm and whispered, "Hold steady." Then, something I didn't plan happened. A former board member named Jules stood up and said he had resigned last year because of the committee's nonsense. He said, a copy of the email chain in which the current board decided to fine me while ignoring a tip about Victor's nephew's paddleboard because, quote, "it's family." He held up his phone. Screenshots circulated by evening. The neighborhood forum popped like oil. 2 weeks later, the state's office that oversees community associations, most people forget it exists, sent a letter to the board concerning procedural violations. Closed-door meetings without proper notice, fines levied without a properly adopted schedule, selective enforcement. They required the board to undergo training, rescind improperly adopted rules, and reimburse homeowners for certain fines, including mine. Rita resigned as treasurer the day after that letter. Victor tried to hold on, but another letter came from the state's Consumer Protection Division, triggered by Jules's screenshots. The board was levied a civil penalty, small in the grand scheme, but large enough that it stung the pride. Punishment in real life is rarely dramatic. It comes in paperwork, in training videos that make you wish you'd done the right thing before someone made you watch them, in resignations dressed up as spending more time with family. Craig stepped down as president. The management company lost its contract after a special meeting. Denise called me from a number I didn't recognize and said she was moving to a different account and hoped there were no hard feelings. I told her I had none, but I did ask for the association's records regarding lake maintenance for the past 5 years. She sent me a PDF that confirmed what I suspected. They'd done very little beyond mowing the banks. I didn't want to be a petty king of water. I drafted a permit application that was 1 page long. Name, address, type of craft, safety gear checkboxes, acknowledgement of rules. I added an optional section where applicants could list skills they'd be willing to contribute to lake care. Plantings, trash pickup after storms, goose control strategies that didn't involve cruelty. I set a date for a safety session taught by a retired firefighter named Hank, who lived on the street behind mine and had taught his grandkids to swim one by one. I announced it on the forum and posted paper notices on the bulletin boards near the mail kiosk and the trailhead. The first session, 6 people came. Margot, a high school teacher named Dana, the kid with the aluminum skiff, and his dad, a quiet teenager named Miriam, who had a folding kayak, and a woman named Brenna, who wanted to fish from a float tube. I taught them what I'd learned about life vests, hypothermia, and how to approach the spillway without getting sucked by the current on a rain-swollen day. Hank demonstrated how to throw a rescue rope. We practiced until our hands remembered. At the end, I signed their permits. Then, because I remembered the facts that got us here, and because facts matter, I enforced the policy for real. Victor's nephew came down one Saturday with his paddleboard and 2 friends. He looked at me across the water like I would back down. I walked to the dock, waved, and asked to see their permits. "We live here," he said. "We all do," I said. He smirked. "This is ridiculous." "You're welcome to apply," I said. "The next session is Wednesday evening. I'll be there." He cursed under his breath, quietly enough that it would not go on the scale, and stalked away. That week, his aunt tried to organize a boycott of the safety sessions. It didn't catch. People were tired of games. They wanted to fish with their kids without worrying about being fined because they weren't friends with the chair of the compliance committee. They wanted to paddle at dawn. They wanted rules that applied to everyone the same way. Summer heated up. I hired a contractor to repair the spillway lip and had them schedule it for a weekday morning so the least number of people would be inconvenienced. I posted warning signs and caution tape, and when a teenager ducked the tape to see what was going on, I didn't make a federal case out of it. I asked him to help me carry a bag of quick-setting concrete. He told me he wanted to study civil engineering. I said, "Better boots then," and gave him Hank's number for summer work. Storms that year came heavy, the kind that make you track radar at 2 in the morning. On one such night, the culvert upstream clogged with branches. I got a text from Ben the surveyor, who lived 2 streets over. "Outlet flow down. You see this?" I pulled on rain pants and a headlamp and sloshed through water up to my shins to the culvert. The debris was a tangle of branches and someone's lawn chair that must have washed downstream. Hank showed up with a pike pole. We cleared the jam. Stella, the engineer, came the next day and ran a quick inspection to make sure we hadn't created worse problems. We hadn't. I slept 14 hours that weekend and woke feeling like I had a life again. The board that replaced the old one was quieter. 3 new members, Dana from the safety session, a man named Greg who cared about storm water more than was normal, and a nurse named Priya who asked good questions, took their seats. They didn't love that I had all the power over the water. I didn't love it either, so we worked toward an agreement that made sense. I would remain the owner, with all the liability that entails, but I'd grant the association an easement for fishing from shore and non-boating recreation like the walking path. For boating, we agreed that permits would remain at my discretion as allowed by the recorded covenants, but I would offer an automatic permit after safety training to any resident who agreed to sign the liability waiver and follow the rules, and I would entertain bans only for repeated violations or reckless behavior. I wrote these policies in plain language and posted them. There were people who wanted me to be cruel back, to bar Victor and his family forever. I didn't. But justice has a different course. In addition to the state's penalties and the loss of their positions, the board's prior actions made the association's insurance carrier frown. The premium increased. At a special assessment meeting, the community debated how to cover it. It was not lost on anyone that the extra cost was tied to the old board's decisions. The people whose voices were loudest at the beginning now had to explain why their approach had been sensible. A quiet kind of punishment, the kind that changes behavior because it hurts in the pocket where decisions are felt, took hold. Craig moved away within the year. He put his house on the market with photos that did not include the lake. It's true. At the beginning, I was the only one who could boat legally because I needed to establish the system and prove I meant it. That was never the end game. It was leverage to build something that couldn't be twisted by whoever had the gavel that month. Everyone who applied and came to training got a permit. Most weekend mornings, if you looked out from any second-story window that faced the water, you'd see a few specks moving. Brenna in her float tube, Dana and her aunt in blue kayaks, the aluminum skiff with the boy who now wore a whistle. Sometimes I was one of those specks in my own red milk crate kayak, making my circle like a clock hand, always turning. The new facts layered on themselves like sediment. After the first autumn, the biologist I'd consulted suggested stocking a modest number of triploid grass carp to keep submerged vegetation in check without allowing them to reproduce. We did the paperwork and arranged delivery. On that day, neighbors brought lawn chairs and thermoses. We joked about issuing IDs to fish. We took pictures, but not for social media. For a corkboard in the clubhouse that now held notices for first aid nights and lost and found sandals. We also did a shoreline planting in spring, rushes, pickerel weed, arrowhead, with volunteers who wore old sneakers and gloves. When geese tried to set up a long-term encampment, we used the strategies the biologist recommended. Tall plantings to reduce line of sight, motion-activated sprinklers. It worked better than any shouting ever had. I did make one rule that was personal and probably a little idiosyncratic. No boats on the water before sunrise by more than 15 minutes. Not because I wanted to trim anyone's joy, but because the herons needed a quiet margin of day, and because I remember being fined for a thing that wasn't wrong, and I never wanted to become that mistake from the other side. If someone pushed it, I'd walk down and say, "Give it 5 minutes," in a voice as calm as I wished someone had used on me that first day. Years make a story look tidier than it was as it unfolded. There were still dust-ups. A teenager once jumped from the spillway wall, even though the sign said not to. He got scraped. Not drowned, thank all the gods. His mother raged on the forum about how the lake owner made things too strict. And then the next week, she dropped off homemade ice cream sandwiches after seeing me and Hank haul 2 bags of trash out of the inlet after a storm. She never apologized, not with the word, but ice cream is a vocabulary of its own. Sometimes I imagined a sliding doors version of this life where I'd paid the fine and never set another blade into the water. It would have been quieter, at least on the forum. But I also think about how that version of the story would have taught the wrong lesson, that it's better to accept nonsense than to insist on clarity. I would have stayed away from the place I bought my house to be near. I would have let the board's bad rulemaking keep making small wrongs until they added up to a real one. The strangest part of all this, and maybe the most ordinary, is how quickly people adapt to new facts once they're settled and fair. Neighbors now schedule their boat safety session like they schedule dental cleanings. People who were once loud in their opposition are quiet because their kids like fishing on Saturday mornings more than they liked watching their mother argue on a message board. The retired firefighter tells the same joke about whistles every time, and people laugh because it's good not to have to be sharp all the time. When a new family moves in and looks at the lake with the hungry eyes of people who chose this spot because of water, someone points them to the sign-up sheet in the clubhouse, and life keeps turning. But the origin stays in me in a way I don't deny. The bad HOA fined me for boating on the lake. That's a fact that started the story. The reason I walked into a fluorescent-lit room to face a row of people who had forgotten that power is supposed to be the ability to take care of something, not the right to shove. It matters that they made the fine personal and that they threatened a lien and foreclosure, escalating the stakes in a way that would frighten someone who hadn't spent an afternoon reading covenants and talking to a county clerk. It matters that they said it was about wildlife while letting their own kin break the rule. Every time I pick up a piece of trash on the path, every time I send a note about a minor rule violation with a request, not a threat, I remember. It matters, too, that I bought the lake, not because I wanted to be grand, but because the developer left a piece hanging in the air and the county caught it, and I took it out of the air, wrote my name on it in a way that doesn't erase anything, and created a process that had been missing. I bought it through a tax sale, with title insurance and dam inspections and conversations with engineers and surveyors. I bought it understanding I now have to track muskrat burrows and call Stella after heavy rain. I have to budget to reline the outlet pipe within the next 3 years, and when I do it, I'll post notice and include a diagram, because pictures calm people more than prose ever will. And the fact that I am the only one who can boat on it now, in the legal sense of issuing the permits, matters because it allows a fair policy to exist. It is not a crown. It's a clipboard I carry to the safety sessions. It means I can keep a list and apply it evenly. It means that when someone who was an antagonist comes to a session, Victor did eventually, after most of the neighborhood was already going out at dawn, I can hand him a whistle and say, "We start with a short video." He watched, he checked the boxes, he signed the waiver, and he took a permit. He didn't say thank you, and I didn't need him to. I watched him push off from shore on a flat evening. The paddles dripped quiet, and thought, if only we'd all been this ordinary earlier. Punishment had come to the antagonists in ways that matched their acts. The state trainings, the civil penalty, the public resignations after private conversations, the loss of the sleight of hand that is selective enforcement. Todd, who once shouted in the hallway about ruining his kid's summer, was censured by the new board after he tried to throw a beer can into the lake during a fireworks show and was caught on camera by his own neighbor's doorbell device. He paid a fine, lawfully adopted this time, and spent a Saturday with Hank hauling branches after a storm, which was, I think, better for him than any lecture. Craig, the former president, tried to list claims about the lake in his real estate disclosure that made the place sound like a gated reservoir, and his realtor, to her credit, talked him down to the truth. I keep the first fine letter in a folder. When I open it years later, the blue scan of the signature is still ridiculous. But I don't keep it to stay angry. I keep it to remind myself that peace is a practice and a choice built on actions in the plain daylight, filing deeds, giving safety talks, writing rules in simple sentences, and knowing when to say no because the herons need a quiet 15 minutes at dawn. Last week, at dusk, I saw Miriam, the quiet teenager who brought the folding kayak, paddling in a loop near the cattails. She works at a sandwich shop now and is saving for community college. She waved and kept her distance in the way of people who are simultaneously solitary and not alone. A soft wind wrinkled the water. I could hear the far-off noise of a lawnmower, the squeak of a dock cleat, the slice of a paddle. Hank was sitting on a bench he'd helped repair. The grass carp made their slow, secret work under us. Across the way, ducks stitched V's into the surface, and the sky went pink in strips. Everything, for that moment, was both ordinary and specific, which is how I like it. Not a triumph exactly, but a life that makes sense. It was a long road to get here from a notice under a wiper blade. It involved a bad HOA, a fine for a quiet boat, a purchase at a public auction, and a set of permits that landed in the world as rules anyone could read and follow. I didn't set out to prove anything, but I did insist on the simple fairness of being able to do what you can do safely on a piece of water you chose to live beside. If that makes me the person who fills out dam inspection forms and keeps a pike pole in the trunk for flood nights and writes the policy about sunrise margins, so be it. I'll be out there at dawn, within the 15 minutes, milk crate strapped behind my seat, whistle at my chest, making slow circles that leave no wake except the kind that spreads and calms and eventually disappears. Thank you for watching.